Sorry, I'm trying to get another. This after our speaker today, we will get another person to introduce a new challenge in the area of agriculture. So I'm trying to give him directions to come. This is something from which we've been working with the University of Tel Aviv and the government of Israel. They want us to partner, get the local developers to work around agricultural applications, which they are targeting around smallholder livestock farmers. And so he was to come and introduce, then we can talk about how we are going to take that forward. We have one of the top researchers from IBM today to talk to us about water. You remember the last time we were talking about energy, we were working on the challenge around energy. I think we are meeting on 20th to look through and see who has succeeded with that. But today, I would bring my sister here. Karibu. I have known my sister here for some time because I normally do a lot of things with IBM, and today we have asked her to come and speak about technology in the water sector. I don't know how much most of you know about that there is technology around water, but we are going to get the details from her. She's from the Caribbean, and I've been asking if there is any, but you look younger. When is somebody here to detain her in Kenya before she decides to go back? So I think you can give the entire profile of yourself. Sure. Okay, thank you. Karibu.
Thank you, Dr. Ndemo, for the very nice introduction. I was in a meeting, I don't know, like a month ago, and I was with a bunch of other business folks, and we were thinking about strategies for technologies. And so these were all, just internal IBMers, but some of the folks were from another side of the business. And so as we were sitting down and I told them what I did, they gave me like a look. They're like, oh, water technology, oh. So some people don't even think about what it takes to have a fully functioning system, to actually have water available every day without a fuss. And so, I know for a lot of folks in Kenya, although it's maybe become normal, your process for getting water is kind of complicated. Everybody has a tank, you think about Nairobi water, like you actually think about the fact that which day you're gonna get water or not. You think about, well, should I go for another option? And in other places around the world, that's maybe not so much of an issue. So for my talk today, I want to give you first a view of, IBM research in particular, like what is that all about? And then how do we bring research and technology to water management, specifically for Kenya, given that that's the context. So for me, as far as background, as Dr. Ndemo mentioned, I grew up in the Caribbean. My background is in civil and environmental engineering. I did my graduate studies in Wisconsin. So remember, when I went to Wisconsin, before I had lived pretty much my entire life in the Caribbean. So this whole idea of snow and all of that other stuff was entirely foreign and new to me. So after grad school, I stayed for another 10 years or so in the US and worked across the water industry. So initially I worked with a large private water company, and they were large enough so that maybe roughly half of the water systems in the US were being managed by them. And this is now a private entity that's running these water systems. And so they were so large that they would have enough room to now have like a research staff. So that's where I came in. And so in the US, research around water means that you're thinking about a lot of issues around quality. How do these private utilities, how do they keep up with regulations that are upcoming? And so that was a lot of my work. So I did that for about 4 years. And then I switched a little bit and started to do more with corporate water management. So I don't know if you're familiar with Campbell's Soup, but it's like it's a large food and beverage company in the US. And for them, at the time that I started to work with them in the US, there was a huge movement around green and sustainability. And every large company wanted a stake so that they could say, I'm green too. I'm doing things that are positive and all of that. And they did in essence, but it's a little more kumbaya than the reality is, because really for any company who wants to pursue something like that, in the end they're still asking, well, what's in it for me? Like, how is it helping me, meet the bottom line? But still quite interesting. So many of my projects were around, if you have a facility and water is creating inefficiencies, whether it's around energy or just around costs, how can you change the system so that you better modify that? So I did that for a few years, and then just before coming here, I had my own consulting startup, and I worked with local and federal governments to help tackle their questions around environmental management. And so every government has to think about that, right? Because water is one of these fundamental things that you have to do something around. So I've done work in the Virgin Islands, a little bit in West Africa, and then around the US as well. So after doing that for a few years, I wanted to stop being a consultant, because as a consultant, you're kind of jumping into a place for maybe 3 weeks, you study the problem, and then you do your recommendations. And so I wanted to be based outside of the US, and my work, in the US, I was working with low-income communities and their issues around environmental quality management, so the Caribbean, West Africa. So my idea was, I'd done the US for so long, I wanted to be, not be there for a while. So that would mean either the Caribbean or somewhere on the continent. And I was headed to West Africa. But then this IBM discussion started at around the same time in 2013. And so my opportunity in West Africa, because I was going to jump more into research, it was taking a while. And then the IBM discussions just continued happening. And so then finally I said, well, East-West, what's the difference? So in the end, given what IBM was trying to do, I was really enthralled with the idea. And so that's what brings me to Kenya. And so, as most of you might already know, but I'll just kind of give you the rundown. So IBM opened up officially its first commercial research lab on the continent and based it here in Nairobi. And it was officially opened in 2013 of November. And so commercial research, what that means is that, so IBM Research is an arm of IBM, the whole company. So whereas we have another office at the Atrium area, I don't know if you're on Shaka Lenana. So if you go to that office and you talk to those guys, you're ready to buy something, right? Like, you know what you want. You want some kind of server thing, or maybe if it's our GBS guys, there's some other kind of solution and you pretty much know what you want and somebody's gonna just give you. They give you a box, or they give you maybe access to our Bluemix platform, but something, you know what you want. The research lab is a little bit different. So the idea is that we are looking to, tackle grand challenges, but with context. So right now, in terms of the mission of our lab, our goal is to develop and evolve commercially viable innovations that make a difference. And so we do this in areas such as education, healthcare, water that I'll talk to you about today, energy, financial inclusion, human mobility. The way that we go about doing research is that, well, first of all, when you say research, what does that mean? So for our perspective, and in general, if you're kind of looking at that academic bent, it means at a minimum, there's a question. And that question is so interesting to you, and it's raising so many links and interconnections that you're willing to invest a lot of time and energy to figure it out. Because you know if you figure it out, then it will do something and make a difference. From a commercial perspective, there's one additional layer. So if you go to grad school or anything else, that's what you should have, right, when you're doing research. You have some question that's so interesting to you that you're spending hours and hours working late nights and everything else so that you can figure this thing out. We do that at the research lab, but then also we have to do it in conjunction with partners. So it's not enough for me to think, oh, this is such a cool question, I want to spend all of my time on it. When I'm in a commercial establishment, then there must be some partner externally who's saying, yeah, I want you to figure that out, because if you figure that out, that's going to help me as well. So that's what it means to be this commercial entity that's doing research. So in the end, if we have these questions that are so very interesting, and if we can work with partners who are in the local ecosystem who say, yeah, I want to figure that out too, in the end, we're essentially co-designing and co-investigating this area. And we've now also, for IBM, created a path for how it will develop its next wave and next generation of technologies. So that's really the differentiator for what it means to be this commercial entity that's doing research on the continent. So then today, I guess to now get into the presentation, we'll just turn it on. So around water, the interesting question that we have, it starts from just a look at the numbers and then a view of the landscape. So for the numbers that you see here, the first one is this one. So approximately there are 50 level 3 water systems across Kenya. And level 3 means that it's fully functioning, like they bring a connection to your house, and there's an authority like Nairobi Water that's operating it. So there are roughly 50 of those. And although there are 50 of those, they only cover 40% of the population. And the percent of the population that is covered, they don't get 24/7 water supply. That sets up a whole set of questions about, well, what are people doing when they're not getting water? Like, how are they now going about getting what it is that they need? The other number that's quite interesting is this one. So around the world, when people talk about water, what it's used for, how it's allocated, there's this general number that's come up, and it's like the 70%. And no matter where you go, you'll see it like written in a book. It says 70% of the world's water is used for agriculture. And what's interesting is that I saw that for Kenya also. And I started to wonder, well, how could that be when most of it is rain-fed? Like like most of the small-scale farmers, they're not using irrigation yet. So the first question is, that 70%, how did somebody measure it? Did they go to each small-scale farmer and check and do an inventory of what they were using? Well, I would question that also, because I've looked for numbers to see exactly how many small-scale farmers there are, and people have thrown out 15 million or whatever else, but I haven't actually seen any comprehensive survey that tells me how many there are. And so if we don't have that part covered, and there's such a significant part of the economy, how do we know how much water they're using? So these are the questions then that are guiding how we think about the research questions that we're asking, and as we're looking to think about, well, where is it that technology can matter? So all of that now summarized into this one question: how much water do we have? If you ask anyone, they'll give you a number. But the point is that many people will give you many different numbers. And so across the board, there seems to be just a general lack of consensus about how much water do we have. And if you think about it from the very big picture, if we don't know how much water we have, then it means we don't really know how much we're using, and it means we don't really know how are we going to be when the next drought comes. So that's what we want to get to the bottom of. So today, through 3 use cases where I focus on individual consumers, I'll look at how we're looking to tackle that question. So first, an individual homeowner or an institution can ask, how much water do I have? And so their reasons for asking that and the kind of information that they care about will be different from, let's say, a farmer, because his constraints are pretty different. But I'll cover that use case as well. And then over here, the last one that I'll look at is for the way that we've approached this whole thing, the idea is that if I know individual by individual in the urban spaces and farmer by farmer, if I can understand the context around which they use water and have better insights on how much water that they're using, then when this county governor or just other person who wants to look at a bigger picture policy, when they now ask how much water do we have, I can really give an answer that makes sense because I've really studied at the individual level what's going on. So that's roughly the approach that we've taken for how we think about this. Just a little bit more on the picture. So what's depicted here essentially is an aquifer for what it looks like, a very rough idea. But the reason that I have this as well is that for all of the issues that I mentioned before about understanding how much water that we have, the groundwater plays a really important part in that whole puzzle. So in the urban spaces, if Nairobi water doesn't come and you get frustrated enough and you have enough money, you're gonna drill a borehole. So what does that mean for how the water resource is being allocated and how it's gonna be available for the future? And similarly, for farmers, so increasingly, there are questions around just the sustainability and the viability of the small scale farmer. So some simple things such as I've heard, so the entrepreneurs who work with small scale farmers, they say things such as, yeah, I'm managing a bunch of farms, but these ones where they're rain fed, I don't know if I can trust their reliability. And so increasingly there's a drive to move more farmers to implement irrigation. But then the question is, how do we do that? And then once you start irrigating, maybe you can control things more precisely, but then how do you do that for a small scale farmer to make the numbers work? So we're tackling questions around that as well. So I'll now just go into just first this individual homeowner. So for us, one of the things that we're looking at doing then to understand better how much water does a homeowner use or how much water does an institution use, we're looking at smart water tanks. So because of the landscape, because there isn't 24/7 water supply, in many places, for many households, there's some kind of water tank. And so what we've done and started to do is that we're instrumenting water tanks. So we put a sensor on the tank. That sensor is measuring the water levels every minute or so, and then it's sending that information back to the cloud. And then from there, we do some analytics, and back to the homeowner, we can serve him up information on his phone. And so that information would be how much water have you used today, how much water have you been using, and then we can do projections about, well, we think we understand you now. It looks like tomorrow you're gonna use this amount. So that's the kind of work that we're doing at the individual household level. And so what becomes interesting is that if this tank is also connected to whether it's Nairobi water or it's being fed by groundwater, it helps us understand the supply situation. So we get to understand both supply and the demand situation. So for this picture is now an elevated tank, and it's being fed by a ground storage tank. And as one of my researchers, you probably know, some of you who have been here, you might recognize him. It's Mo. But so he just happened to be on top of there because I think we were checking something with the sensor one day. But you don't have a researcher with every tank. But anyways, but that's the idea. So in terms of how we do this, so Internet of Things, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that terminology, but that's the basic approach that we're implementing to develop these smart water tanks. And with the Internet of Things, the idea in general is that things that were normally dumb, whether it's your chair or something else, you found a way to hook it up. And so this is IBM's reference architecture around the Internet of Things. And so just in general for what you're seeing here, so things, and here you see windmills, delivery trucks, and other things, we connect them up to the internet, and here we're implementing that via GSM. And then once you've collected that and found a way to aggregate those data streams, you either process them real time or you process the historical streams. And then you do some analysis, and then you can serve back up insights to the different kinds of entities. So as you can imagine, for these smart water tanks, at some point, we're going to have independent, small individuals who are going to be the managers of this thing. Because ultimately, IBM doesn't do, our official line is that we don't do hardware. And really we don't, but we do have strategic partnerships, because the more people that we connect with that are using hardware, that are using our back-end systems, that for us is a win-win. We do analytics. That's really the value add, or secret sauce. And so if there are others who are going to build devices and connect them up, that's what we help you do as well. So in terms of just the data and what it looks like, so as we've been studying tanks, there are very different signals and patterns that we encounter and that we have to make sense of. So the idea is that in addition to telling somebody, your water tank is low, do you want me to turn your pump on, or do you want me to order delivery? I have to now also generate other insights. So if I have tank levels, I can get tank volumes, and then I can do other things with that in terms of, in addition to forecasting how much you might use in the future. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the meat of how that would get done. And so here you notice, like in the blue, you have the raw signals. So this one is just a homeowner's tank, and you can just see just general drawdown over time. And this is over 24 hours. Over a similar 24-hour period, this is what's happening at an educational institution. And so two things to note about this. So the first is that for any of the algorithms that we have, so in the red, what you're seeing are now how we've cleaned up the streams. So we've done some processing, and we need these cleaner streams so that we can now develop a good estimate of how much volume has been consumed. It's a little bit easier, so the algorithm has to be robust enough to handle just a declining gentle stream like this, and then something really messy and dirty like this one. So in the end, we have robust enough algorithms that can do that. What's interesting about this one is that this particular tank is connected to a borehole. And so for the owner, for the educational institution and the facility manager there, or the person who is tasked with being concerned about the operation of the pumps and ensuring the facility has water, their big complaint was that, man, this borehole, every time we turn it on, it's driving up our electricity. And so, but that's the water source. They don't have an option. From this, though, one of the recommendations that we're going to give back to them is that, why is it really that given how this pump is operating, that it needs to turn on once every hour? That makes a difference as well. So at a minimum for this individual, because we better understand what's happening with these water patterns, we're able to go back and say, you know what? The next step should be that we work on optimizing how often this pump turns on. And can we come up with a better arrangement so that your pump isn't operating as often? And that's just to give you an idea then of what happens when you start to monitor, you collect the data, the volumes that are used, but then you also have better insight on the options and decisions that somebody could take. So, and here's just now another summary of, our water monitoring efforts via the tank. And so in the end, I know a lot of you here focus on apps and everything else. We do too. But the only point I want to make, and with the discussion that we had before we even get to the point of designing the app and trying to push things out, there's a deeper question that you're really trying to tackle in the first place. And so for us, when we approach even apps, then we're thinking about, well, who needs the mobile app in the first place? So the homeowner, so you see here, for example, we've got a smartphone app, but maybe should it be SMS? Would he prefer to get information that way? So as we have issues around, well, what does the end user, what makes sense for him in the end? We have to think about that very carefully, and that comes through just different user studies and maybe some intuition and feedback from what people are saying, how they would use this kind of information. Just also summarized here, this number just gives you an idea of the scale for these tanks that we're looking to implement. And so essentially, we're not just implementing, one or two tanks. The goal in the end is to equip and instrument thousands of tanks so that you have massive data streams that are coming in the back end. And so with the IoT architecture that I showed you before, then research also means that we have to think about, well, how is a system going to handle all of that? And so that I can deliver back to you information in a very quick time. in this app, for example, one of the things that we had to work through as you think about mobile interaction and mobile dynamics, a mobile phone, when you have it, it needs to be quick, fast. And if it's not quick, fast, then it's not working. So initially, when we worked on this one, we're pulling the real-time data streams and showing you every point on your display. And that takes time to load. So considering the time it takes to connect to Safaricom and then just other communication delays, we had to think about, well, how do we optimize it? Because initially it was taking maybe 3 minutes or so to even come out there. So even that now presents a research challenge. So just to kind of recap, from this bigger question of how much water do I have, I mean, I hope you've seen that then there are multiple areas that you have to now tackle to start to even address that question. And then I've now ended even on the mobile interface, because that's a part of now giving to one individual person an answer about how much water am I using. So we can go on to the small-scale farmer use case. And so these smart tanks that we're talking about, and this is just a picture that I pulled randomly, because I won't share pictures of the other place, but we've started to go out to farms, and one is in the eastern area where it's quite dry. And so there, the challenge for them is, so it's really dry. They have to figure out how to get water. And then in some places, there's no electricity. So for one farm that we're working with, they have solar equipment set up. And the farmer there, he's been quite astute and really smart at his process. So he drilled a well. It's about 30 meters. And manually, he had to determine, well, how much water does that well provide to me? And of course he needs to know that, because he can't depend on rain to do the sukuma wiki over here, the chickens over there, and the tomatoes over there. So one day he, with I guess his guys at the farm, they pulled out the water to see every day how much water really is in this well, because the water that's there is what's going to determine how much he can grow on his 1 acre plot. And so they determined that as they were pulling out manually, about 2,000 liters is what the well would produce. So now for the way that they're operating, they pull out 2,000 liters, and if they do that in the morning, because of how groundwater is flowing, by the next day, another 2,000 liters is there in general. And so for this particular location, we're putting in these smart tanks as well. So he has a tank, of course, right? Because you need to save that somewhere. And so the idea there for that farm will be that as we monitor the water usage, well, first we'll know how much water is he really using every day, and then we'll be able to advise on what should happen in the future. And so, so the farmer that we visited, he has just different patches of things at different locations. So why, for example, are the tomatoes getting the same amount of water as the sukuma wiki? Because it's manual, right? So he's got the tank and he's got the irrigation system, but they just open it for 30 minutes every day. Do they need to do that? Could it be 15 minutes for one versus the other? And if he's in such a water-scarce region, you really want to know, right, what's going on. So I have here then, so in addition to the bulk availability of water, I wanted to just point out the other emerging issue. And small-scale farmers are also particularly affected by it. And it's the question of quality. So when you think of a crop like tomato, for example, it's really finicky. So it's not enough to just say, well, whenever the water comes, I'll just make sure the plant grows. But during its growth stage, if you haven't provided the right amount of soil moisture, whether it's too much or too little, then you end up with issues like this. This is not, there's no fungus or anything here. This is like this result that you see here is caused by water deficiency in the end. And so what that means is that we're getting to the point increasingly where we have to figure out how to get water to the farm so that water doesn't become a limiting ingredient. But then once we've gotten it there, then there are questions around how do we control its application. So some of you might be familiar with this idea around precision agriculture. And so in the US, for the corn growers, for the wheat growers, they deploy these massive systems, but then they're also layering on it satellite information so they understand how green the canopy is, and then they understand evapotranspiration. And then they're using that to now carefully control how much water do I add. so that I get just the right amount every day that matches the growth stage of the crop. Our challenge here, we're interested in this, of course, because there's a lot of data and fine-tuning that it takes to do that. But the question that we have is, how do you do that for a small-scale farmer? So in the US, this idea works because you've got the economies of scale. Like, the farms are huge, right? They're massive, massive farms. So once you think of how much productivity you're gonna get from these massive hectares, then the cost of these inputs, it scales. So as we're thinking about the small-scale farmers here, the challenges are several. Well, we can't just get the satellite imagery to know what's going on in the farm like that, right? Because for the scale of satellite imagery, it's too large. We're talking about 1 to 5 acre farms predominantly. So our challenge has been to think about what can you do on the farm, what kind of instrumentation can you deliver to now help the farmer or the person who's managing the farm be more efficient and more precise about how they're applying inputs. So our steps are as follows. So and we're working with one of these farms in Eastern at the moment. And so the idea will be, so we ensure that there's a smart tank. So that lets us know what's going on with the water situation in general. But then we're also going to add soil moisture sensors. And then we're working through the other sensors that are absolutely critical to monitor and predict the growth stage. So moisture is okay. But then, of course, farmers also want to know, well, do I have enough fertilizer? And then if something does go wrong with the crop, like, what is it? Can I find more automated ways to understand what should I do? Because the worst thing is to have your crop fail and not know what's going on. And so, like, I was having a discussion this morning with Elizabeth. But so at my place, I have tomatoes, and I'm not saying I'm growing them. There's somebody doing some farming things in my place. So I got like some tomatoes and I got some Sukuma Wiki. The tomatoes are sad. They're very, very sad. We don't know what's going on with them. And it looks like, this withering thing that's going around, that might have gotten them, but I don't know. So somebody waters them in the morning and they're getting sun throughout the day, but I'm not doing monitoring there yet. So now all I have is, after 2 months of kind of looking in on these tomatoes every now and then, it doesn't look good. It looks like they're about to go. And this is not my primary income, right? This was just for fun. But imagine for a farmer who's invested all of this money, he now is riding on the productivity of this crop to kind of make all of these other things happen. And just like that, it goes. He doesn't know if it's because he didn't apply water the right way. He doesn't know if it's because a pest has been coming. He doesn't know. And so I think that's really the worst. So for our efforts, as we look at this water-related things that are happening for agriculture, that's also a part that we want to play. And then that's also what a lot of this data is going to help us address. So here's just a quick summary of then just some of the analyses that we are going to look at. So on the question of affordability, of the kinds of equipment that you equip and you put onto this farm, we're thinking about a couple things. I mean, it seems that in general, a farmer, once he has an idea that he can do reasonably well with this piece of land, given what he's expecting, once he knows what he's expecting, then he's calculating back about how much he wants to put in the inputs. And so if we can make these things available, like this data, this advice, and this monitoring available at a price point that makes sense for him, then I think we have something to work with. So we're thinking about things such as, if we put the monitoring devices on the farm, do we lease them maybe? Or are there ways to make this information available that it fits the price point that makes sense for him? So all of that for us is research. And so we're actually going out, we're working with the different farmers, working with the different entities to figure that out. And so maybe the next time that I talk here, I'll update you on how far we've gotten with that. This was just a little bit of Bluemix, but I'll skip that. So for the apps that we deploy, I don't know if you're familiar with the platforms that we have for managing data, for deploying your apps and all of that. But Bluemix is one of our app building platforms. So if you quickly wanted to deploy, get your app out, that's what we have. And then for we work with universities. specifically, so that I forget how long the free trial is. But if you're interested to know more about that and the services that we provide for entrepreneurs to get their ideas out there, you can follow up with me at the end. Let me skip that. So we'll go to then this third use case. So we looked at the homeowner, we looked at the farmer, and so now over here, there's someone else who's looking in on the whole landscape and saying, how much water do we have? So this is the governor, this is maybe the president even, and he wants to know what's going on. And so we're saying, again, because we know at each school, at each hospital, each household, if we know what they're using, and then each farm, if we know what's happening there and the context around it, we can understand wards. Then we can understand Nairobi, and then more broadly, we can understand entire counties and the country. That's the ground-up, bottom-up approach that we're looking to do, and it all involves some kind of modeling, monitoring, and analytics. So the system that we're bringing together, so behind all of this, I haven't focused too much on the back end, but before I kind of told you we're sending some data up to the cloud, some magic happens with analytics, and then we can spit out some data. But there's actually a back-end architecture that's pulling all of this together. And so what's critical then for what we're building is that we have to understand, of course, the water points. So that means the boreholes or the shallow wells, the water tanks that are connected to them. We also want to understand property systems, and that means, is it a school? Is it a farm? Is it just a residence? And so that helps us with predictions around, well, what should be normal, for example, for the use at a location like this. Then we're also linking in, and I'll touch on a couple, so weather systems is one thing that we're looking to make some headway into. And the weather thing is kind of tricky for a couple reasons. So we have, for our weather solution that we've implemented elsewhere, what our goal is to get really specific and particular. So right now, for the way weather prediction works, it's really small scale, meaning it'll tell you for all of Nairobi what's going on. But really what you want to know is at my house right now, what's going to happen, or tomorrow and next week, what's going to happen. Of course, for the small scale farmer, same thing. He wants to know, I mean, if he hasn't gone over to irrigation yet, or even if he has, what do the prospects look like for next week? Is it going to rain? And then next season, is it going to rain? That information isn't available right now. So for our weather solution, that's the idea, to get to that level of granularity. So that in and of itself is a technical challenge. And to give you an example, so we've deployed Deep Thunder. This is the weather solution in the US. And so a couple weeks ago, there was a big snowstorm that was coming. And so for the regular weather forecast, they raised the alarm. And so in the US, for the way that it works, when you raise the alarm about weather, then it means that emergency measures and preparedness must follow. And so that's why you always want to be really careful about what you're saying the severity is going to be. And so in the US, in New York, they got it wrong. They said, oh my God, this is going to be mega awesome snowstorm. And it was just kind of a normal snowstorm. So internally, Deep Thunder knew it. So Deep Thunder, for all of our estimates, was saying, yeah, it's going to snow, but it's just not going to be anything catastrophic. And so had that been the key source of information to make decisions, then they wouldn't have deployed all of these emergency resources unnecessarily, because it costs money every time you gear up for this resource. So that's what's possible for Kenya and for all of the other sub-Saharan African countries. The problem that we have, though, is that weather is not just science, it's also political. And so the best way to say it is we haven't gotten the necessary people comfortable yet that we're not trying to take over their role. So let me just say generally. So when you start talking to the responsible people for weather, and you start saying you can do these things and you want to come in and start predicting the weather, you'll get questions like, wait, what? You're trying to do the weather? Like, what? I mean, that's my job. Like, why are you trying to do that? And so we still have some work to do regarding the political discussions that are happening around that to even get to the point of standing this up and delivering the value that we know is possible. I mean, there are other questions also, of course, about data and everything else. I mean, in the US, I mean, it's a huge investment that's made by the government into understanding data in general, and then weather in particular, because so many things are affected by it. So that will be one of the challenges that we have as well. How do we collect enough information from different sources to ensure we have really good weather predictions? And then social systems are also what we're thinking about as we craft together our architecture. So, because the question is, as I've mentioned to you, I kind of spelled out what's possible for a small-scale farmer. But we know that it's not so straightforward, right? Sometimes people are set in and they live in a particular community, and what's right and what makes sense is ingrained, like they already know. And so for some, this idea of this, you know, what is this technology thing may or may not be interesting, even if you spell out the value and the benefit. So how do we consider that? And then what are the nudges? How do you talk to that person or not about how they might be more resilient if they, you know, shifted their operations? So in addition to knowing how many small-scale farmers they are, and that's, I guess, one of the subcomponents of what we want to do, we want to know area by area how many small-scale farmers there are. Once you know that, then you have to now add this other layer of, well, how many of them are actually shiftable anyway? So even if you think that, because for the options and the discussions around agriculture, how it's managed, some people are asking, can you even have this massive number of small-scale farmers anyway and expect to have the economy progress positively? And so some people say, well, we just need to consolidate and aggregate them. And then you'd have to ask, really, is it possible? Is it that simple? And so some things that are now going to be possible, so some options are, if you actually understand where small-scale farmers are located and you understand the resources that they have, some options might be around sharing, right? So let's say there are 10 farmers, you know, in some reasonable proximity of each other, and one of them has a borehole. Once you've drilled the borehole deep enough, and depending on where you're located, maybe they can share, right? So maybe instead of drilling another borehole, one farmer can be the primary provider, and he's now ensuring that the others have water at some equitable rate. Maybe that's possible, I don't know. But unless you know where things are, how many there are, and what their needs are, how can you even make decisions and start to come up with smart solutions for what makes sense? So that's where we want to get to. And then that's then the idea of having this integrated architecture. And so, let's see. I have just one more slide before I wrap up. And this is just a look for Nairobi of all of the boreholes that are everywhere. And so, in essence, this is what I'm saying, right? We want to know where are the homes, where are the schools, and how much is being withdrawn by each of them. Well, I've had this for a little while, but this is the Westlands area. Kibera's kind of down here. So just looking at it, you can kind of see based on the density of the clusters, where the money pockets are and where they're not. So many questions that we can ask about what that all means. But that's where we're heading towards, having not just this 2D visual, but a 3D that says, here's how people are moving, here's how they're working, and then, you know, here's the impact. So from the bigger picture, this is what the county governor might want to see, for example. And so imagine now, in addition to having the sensors that are hooked up to the tanks or even hooked up to the pumps, I mean, there are many other options for sensors that we'll be looking at. But then how about the people and how they're feeling? So at some point, we'll start to integrate social media. I mean, right now on Facebook, there are many active groups that are even surprising to me. You know, there's Digital Farmers, where they talk in detail and in depth about how things are going on their farm. They're asking questions about, well, this picture, what does it mean? So how would we mine that kind of information and create another layer of context to help us understand, you know, who's suffering what where? Anyway, so that kind of integration is really the goal. So for my last slide, just to wrap up, in the end, for what we are doing at IBM and for our research efforts, the idea is to find tailored solutions for different parts of the population that match the questions that they're asking about. And so it's water solutions at scale. So for a farmer, I have a particular offering for you. For the county governor, it's another one, but it's all linked to the same system, because you need that kind of aggregation and cohesion to make it all make sense. I mean, the aquifer, once you've drilled at one particular point, you're not done, because what you've drilled is what you have today, but you don't know what's happening around you tomorrow, next year. So necessarily, if we're going to understand the water management situation, and if we're going to understand how much water we have now, how much water we have in the future, we need to have more aggregated systems, smarter architectures, and just more knowledge and information so that we can serve up data as necessary and as appropriate so that we can make better decisions. So I'll wrap at that, and then I'll happily take any questions that you have.
Amazing, eh? She didn't tell you that she's a PhD, and her full name is Dr. Kala Flemming. So she just said Wisconsin 10 years, and so Wisconsin. Yeah, but one thing you're not going anywhere. One thing I want to add here. I went to Naivasha the other day to just see a farm which is fully automated. Naivasha is quite dry, but what they have done, the scientists have told the farmers that this is how much irrigation water you need. And they have put the irrigation mechanisms, and from that, the manager manages everything from the mobile, that this place is getting dry, we should supply this many liters to this, and then from there they resupply this many liters to the other places. They are using water optimally and actually getting maximum output from the land, which most people did not get money from. So you can actually see how important this is. Number two, when she said we don't have predictor models for weather systems, there is a small group, and even I would introduce them to you. They can actually give you predictions up to 8 by 8 meter, whether the rains are going to come, whether how much amount of rains you would get. So you can actually begin to plan early what you will do with respect to that. Number three, in the Kenya Open Data, we had put all the soils of Kenya. We had mapped the soils of Kenya. It solves half of the problem when you are working towards finding a solution for greater productivity, because you know what you have in the soil. You know the alkalinity, the acidity, whatnot. Now you are looking at what amount of moisture you would put into that soil and what product would you put in the soil to get the maximum output. Those are the areas where we have a lot of problems, especially in Ukambani. You see people growing maize, and maize would never give them maximum productivity because it is not for that climate. So they would rather put cassava there, and those who can put maize on the other side, then we create a commodities exchange from the brains we have here, so that cassava can move across to here and the maize can move across to here. So we have a lot of work to do and a lot of potential if we get to solve this many problems that we have not solved, that everybody is looking up to you to come up with solutions. And plus Dr. Flemming here, we can do anything. So we need many questions. Don't let her go, by the way, without questions. So number one.
You're kind of intimidated then.
Yes, that is what we do. I'm a teacher. You know, I'm a teacher. Teacher intimidates students to think. You see, that's question number one there. Good morning, everyone. You don't have to stand. Okay. You can ask as long as you have to.
Okay, my name is Haron Kibet.
Hi.
My question is on rainfall harvesting. So if in like areas such as Western and Rift Valley, which are very well rain-fed, do you think if we harvest it and maybe like transport it or maybe pipe it to areas such as Eastern, will it be a key solution in terms of agriculture and also consumption?
That's a good question. It depends. Right. So the depends part is because like if you like for your question, then I could start to think about Lake Victoria, and then I could even go over to Congo. And so the only question will be, how do we manage that? So I think anything is like technically it's possible, but then the question is how does it work out, regarding the economics? And then I think maybe a spin-off to what you just said is, well, what would happen if there was just more distributed rainwater harvesting? There's someone even in Nairobi, even, given what the average annual rainfall is for Nairobi, she's been running a guest house primarily on harvested rainwater. And so what is the potential in general for that, even with the variable and relatively low rainfall that we have everywhere? So it's a really great question. But do we do it in aggregate or is it more distributed? And that all comes down, I think, in the end to the economics and then the policy goals of whoever the primary funders would be. But it's absolutely possible, though.
But I also think it's as we move, as the country grows, eventually water would become the most critical resource. We would start fighting around water. Already Moranga is saying Nairobi must pay us for our gold. So if you can store it, the emerging urban centers in the Rift Valley would be your primary customers. And I think we must liberalize the sector in the sense that it can come from various sources. Right now, there are very few or some few people are given water undertaking services in larger areas, actually compromising some of the people who may come up with new solutions.
Yeah. And I think, for what I mentioned before on the social systems, that's initially what intrigued me, just regarding this rainwater harvesting issue. Because in general, when I look across sub-Saharan Africa, it's puzzling to me why there isn't more harvesting happening. So I grew up in the Caribbean, and the same issues that are here with the intermittent supply and all of that, I had that as well. But we never had a water problem. Why? Because we love harvested rainwater. So every inch of roof had gutters, and every other thing that had a surface, we were harvesting water. And so as I began to talk to people here, though, I started to realize that things are the feelings and the perceptions around harvested rainwater vary quite a bit. So Eldoret, we were there last June or sometime last summer. And so in the Soy area, there's a school there. And I had heard in general that people were, a little standoffish to the idea, but I didn't get why. I don't know if I still know why, but I had some discussions. And so talking with a bunch of teachers at a primary school, so we asked them, what do you think about rainwater harvesting? And, I was there with a bunch of the WMIA ladies. And so, we're going and asking, and then, they're actually, the Kenyans are actually asking other Kenyans about this. And in general, the consensus among the teachers, their biology, chemistry, science teachers, they said it's very dirty, very, very dirty. And I said, so do you mean, because they're like, well, they said air pollution and other things, but I said, okay. But suppose it's not going on the roof or anything. Like, suppose you're not concerned about dust. Suppose you're just going to put a bucket there, rain from the heaven, falling to your bucket. What do you think about that one? No. They were just, and why? And so as we kept digging and digging, they started to bring up stories. So like a grandmother had a thing where like they used the rainwater and something happened, and then they heard that story and then it got passed on, and then another thing happened. So nobody had facts per se, but they had some preconceived thing that was brought about. So that's one thing. Again, the question is, how do you overcome that? And then very separately, here in the outskirts of Karen, there's another family there, an entirely different kind of attitude. So for them, the borehole water is salty. We didn't talk very much about water quality today, but that's also another thing that's emerging, right? As you get deeper with your boreholes, you get poorer water quality at some point once you start to mine the groundwater. So for them and where they live, they've got salty borehole water, and the backup for them, rainwater. They harvest rainwater, and that's what they drink, and that's what supplies their family. So understanding how these attitudes and feelings are distributed across the country is important as well. And then in some cases, what that means is that, are you going to understand, well, maybe there's just no other, like rainwater is just never going to work there? Or do we just have to have a different approach for how we introduce and, try to popularize this?
Second question.
Hi everyone. My name is Roger Sandati. I'm a software engineer. Over the past few months, I've been interested in IoT. I believe that's where we're headed. There's so much potential to be done. So when I saw an example today, I think I've gained, my interest has increased. One thing I think you haven't tackled much is, I hope you can hear me. Okay. Is water conservation.
Yes.
Because if you come to me, I like to know how can I conserve this water. For example, the algorithm that you mentioned, is it possible to predict, because it has been doing analysis of how much water I consume. Right. Can you tell when there's a leakage and realize today there's out of abnormally and no, there's a leakage? And then you mentioned also about the pump so that it's not pumping all the time. Can someone use a phone so that when the water level is, say, an eighth or this amount, they can just use their phone to start their pump and such things? Thank you.
Yes, so you asked a couple questions. For the last one, the answer is yes. And that's, I guess, for the potential of what we're doing, everything that you've mentioned is absolutely a part of it. And so on the issue of water conservation, so one of the things that you can do, if you understand how much somebody is likely to use because you now have learned the historical patterns of their consumption, then that is the potential. And so if you forecast that, then you can give somebody a water budget or something. And then maybe if they're really interested to see where they can, conserve water, you could provide advice on that. So that's absolutely the goal. There's another question that you asked on...
Actually, there were two questions. The first was a comment on water conservation.
Okay, so I've addressed. Which one haven't... I thought there was another one that I didn't respond to. Which one? Have I answered all of your questions?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Hello, my name is Grace.
Hi, Grace.
I have a question regarding attitude in terms of how people use water in this country. Would use an example in the Eastlands where a lot of tenants are mushrooming a lot of buildings, and their heavy dependence is on the pumping of water down from the boreholes or the underground dams that they have underneath their buildings. Then again, in regard to the attitude of now the tenants who live within the buildings, they expect that their homeowners will provide water for them. They'll fail to harvest the water. They will fail to utilize the water, how well to conserve, especially at this time when there's no rainfall. So one, is the application ready and accessible to such homeowners? And number two, does it address the attitude of such tenants?
That's a good question. So in other places, for this attitudinal thing, I talked about this idea of nudging behaviors. So one of the things that is thought to help is that for whoever owns the apartment building, one of the things that they could do is to start having a separate bill for the water, right? So if now the actual cost that's associated with it was considered, so if it's a borehole, you're pricing it so that you're really very conscious that, every liter that I pull out, oh my gosh, it's money from my pocket. That might be something that helps. I mean, there are other social things as well that people have thought about, and I don't know, and I'm gonna hedge and say that I still don't know what works for Nairobi and Kenya, but there are other sort of social motivational kinds of things. So for example, if everybody in that apartment, like if it was very visible, like who was using what, right? Who used how much water? Like on a big board in the front, whether it was digital or just manual, apartment A is using this much, and like you put a red flag. what does that do? Do people now start saying, oh my gosh, I don't want the public shaming? So are there
You
approaches
don't go
like
to
that?
the toilet.
So I know shaming in general is very big here, but then can you do it for water as well? And will they just leave the apartment, or will they change their behavior? I don't know, but so that makes a very interesting research question, right? So with something like that and an actual use case, then you can start thinking about how you might design a study to investigate exactly that. Because the question is, what does the intervention look like? Is it going to be an app? Is it going to be some kind of display? Like, what does the interface look like? So that makes for a really good
Actually,
question.
Safaricom has an app, especially in common user places. You just send an SMS, it opens just 20 liters and shuts. And maybe that's the one that can be used. You ask for water, it runs the liters you use and shuts down. And maybe now you pay again. They're using it for some boreholes, where people used to, whenever they used to be given a borehole for free,
Right,
they will finish the water and they carry their water and leave that one running.
right.
So that one is taken care of now.
At the
Yeah.
borehole level.
At even some taps, you can create,
I see.
just brings enough water and then shuts off.
I see.
Yeah. Yes, sir. We'll come.
Hello, my name is Charlotte.
Okay.
My question is more to the business side. How is this profitable for IBM?
Good question. So for the work that we're doing, it depends, right? There are many ways that it can work for the future. So you saw that we're actually having device level monitoring that's happening. So there's a value there. If there are enough individuals that are interested and we could price that adequately, then the business model is around having mass distribution, and then on the back end, there's data that's being served up at some price point that matters. So there's sort of the individual interaction, like going right to the consumer. There's also kind of the county level kind of play. So many governors have made pledges about making sure everybody has water. Well, how do they keep track of that? And how do they know how to do that? So from the governmental and just broader county management perspective, there's an offering there as well. And then, just separately, there are many other players. So for the work that we do and who our external engagements happen to be with, there are also donor organizations that we are working with at the moment, because they have questions around, so the question for them is, well, who do I give what money? Because I'm still trying to see something different happen. So some of the questions that I have here are being addressed with organizations who they're either looking to transition away from the donor model, but trying to think of how infusing can open up the space so that there's more data, the water data has more value, and kind of bringing on a new set of entrepreneurs as they kind of plan for an exit. So there's one partnership that's something like that. And then there are others who are just in general wondering, are there savvier ways to now understand groundwater, right? So this bottom-up approach is one way to deliver it, because I'm no longer just assuming that some technical expert over here is going to do my whole groundwater model, and then they give me an estimate. I want to know real time, every day, what's going on. And then if I engage each consumer who's a part of that, then I can now tailor these systems. So the business models are kind of around that. Does that?
But also, big data is the oil of the future. They would be having the big data. So when we want to know whether we have water, we go to IBM to pay.
That sounds.
No. But big data is a big element in their future, because isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Claudius Kutner. I work with Agritech Limited. We develop solutions for agribusiness and agriculture in general. My query is with regards to the mindset. We deal with farmers and farmer groups almost on a weekly or daily basis. And the mindset is really a big problem. We are talking here wonderful things this side of the world, and down there, things are totally different. Are there any strategies that, probably having encountered that in the different research that you've been carrying out, that you are already discussing or looking at pursuing other than the normal, the normal seminars or gatherings that they always have as farmers? Are there any strategies with regards to that? And then also with regards to stakeholders in the ecosystem, because you see what our mindset is today is that all that we do should be benefiting the farmer. The farmer is there as a result of other players in various chains, value chains as they call them. So say the corporates would like to also make something out of it. So as we are looking at, say, the pricing model, as you had mentioned, are there strategies that you're also looking at in regard to equalizing so that the corporate guys can also sync with the probably pricing model, as well as understanding that it's not all about the farmer, but the entire ecosystem? So
for your business, how do you engage the farmers? Are you offering them technical assistance and then actual management if they want it? Is that your model?
Applications, actually. We've worked on applications to now better productivity.
But you don't manage the farm?
The applications are supposed to help them manage the farm.
So that's the thing, right? So one of the things that we are thinking about is that, with the mobile apps that we have, you're going right to the farmer, right? Any one of them, the Kawaida farmer or whoever, you're going to them with your mobile app, right?
Yes, depending on the solution.
That's what's tricky. So, because the question is, just because I'm a farmer and just because you think I'm vulnerable, what makes you think I want your app? So, one of the things that we're looking at is, I think that, so the kind of third party or the entrepreneur that I see being really helpful in the process is the one that, and we've worked with, where we're talking to a couple of them, their business model is that right now, before anything else, when they go to talk to the farmer, they're coming with a plan, meaning the farmer is asking, well, what should I grow this year? What makes sense? What's going to make me money? So first they want advice on that. So there are people who are providing advice on that. And separately, there are people who are now saying, oh, okay, I'm telling you what is going to be successful. And by the way, I'm going to manage a farm for you too. So you just, we work out a deal, and then if I'm profitable. So once you have now this interested third party whose success, his success, is dependent on the farmer's success also, we're talking to those guys because now they came in hungry to know how can I, because if you've come in and you said to the farmer, I can make you money, you want everything that's going to reduce any kind of uncertainty in the whole process. So for you, maybe the question is, and for the model that I outlined, how many are there of those third parties? Because maybe you're going to the wrong person. And then the question is, for the app that you're providing, is it really what they need? Like, is that it? So those are my two questions, because I have a lot of hesitation about thinking. You know the kinds of people who do farming, and they're not all the same. There are the telephone farmers in Nairobi who bankroll some farming, but there are others who've been historically mining the land. Like that's been their, and so just thinking that you can say, hey, I got an app and it's really cool, may or may not work because they just don't see why and how. So it depends.
Dr. Let me help Dr. We have something called the quail effect. The quail effect is someone came and grew quails and said he had made money. Everybody went there, So if you use the quail effect, go get one farmer and work with that farmer. Forget about the rest. And say, what made him succeed was this information that came to them. Actually, like iCow, which has presented here, has been very successful because people saw the success. If you go in abstract form that will make you money from this SMS, they won't do it. But let one farmer succeed with adequate amount of water and producing tomatoes which are not swollen or broken, and say he made this much money from 1 acre. You would be bothered by many people. That's us. That's our culture.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Yeah. Regarding the two questions that you had raised, one is those third-party management, probably institutes, if we may call them, probably they aren't as many as they should be. And the ones that are currently there, because they are there for profit. some of them.
Right.
Even if it's for profit by guarantee that they plow back to themselves
Yes.
to continue their work.
Yes.
We are working with a similar entity.
Okay.
And we target lines that are already running. Like what we're doing currently is in the piggery sector. These are very organized farmers. They know what they want. They are not they're not stingy. They're willing to spend if it adds value to them.
Right.
And yes, they see the value in it.
Yeah.
The only challenge
Yeah.
is, it's tech.
It's what?
It's technology. So, just like any change when
Right.
it comes, that's why I was asking
Yeah.
with regards to specifically just strategies.
Yeah.
Because the current strategies that we've actually been using
Yeah.
are through that entity, because they do manage some small scale farms,
Right.
like the pig farmers. They have a network of around
Right.
over 400.
And
So
that
these-
part works, I'm
yes,
assuming.
And it slowly. So that's why I was asking
Yeah.
specifically, besides meeting them in the farmer barazas, etc., is there anything else that probably you've been looking at?
Yeah. In addition to only maybe this one with the network effects, but in the end, it's like selling bed sheets or whatever else in the end, right? Like we like to think because we're doing agriculture or because we're doing these other things that are so public benefit kind of oriented that we're spared from making the case and facing the same kind of marketing challenges that others do. But if I come to town and I'm selling beds and you don't like my beds, I have a problem. So the question you ask is very good, and that's a part of our research, and that's why we have this consideration for the social systems. But I don't have a magic bullet for you. Because even for this issue of trying to do this network effect kind of thing, you have to wait a whole season, and you're not trying to sell your app today.
But
so
no, but even HCDA had a program where they wanted farmers to have standards where you can predict what type of output that is going to come out, because they were focusing on the European market. And that really helped. I don't know how much they went far. The problem with the supply chain in this country is to create standards which will make it easier for the market to, when they order, they know what to expect. But right now, if you order Sukuma Wiki, you would get a good one, which is 500 years,
Yes.
2 months, I don't know what month. We need standards, and maybe that's what you need to incorporate in some of the apps, so that farmers know, if I am to sell to Nakumatt standards are this. If I'm to sell to Europe, European standards are like this, and this is what I must do. Then they can begin to observe that. At the back, we're coming.
Okay, my name is Duncan. About this water project, it's quite a good idea because in Kenya we really need to know how to manage our water. So my question one is on the mindset of Kenyans. You said about what if we do, let's say, a community, we drill one borehole, and then from that one borehole we supply water to the rest. So there is that question, because when you go to the farmers themselves, they usually have trust issues or things like that, because if I sell drilling a borehole and I offer to supply it to the others at a cost, they'll say I want to steal from them or give some funny story. So how are you working on that? And then the professor said something about the soil alkalinity and the different soils in Kenya, but I'm sure by this time now that has already changed, considering the fertilizers that we have been using, the rates, everything that we have done to the farms. So are you providing a session in which you can tell the farmers, you've been using this in your farms, what if you can change to this to better your things? Or are you doing research on sample farms?
Actually, what you are saying, that is the role of CARI. CARI, it's just that CARI never tells farmers that we can do soil testing and tell you the changes in the soil structure. I saw some people from Kitengela, they were looking for that, and I told them to go to CARI. I actually have the results of the analysis and everything. They will give you everything. Maybe, those of you who are developers, you actually need to link with them, because they have a lot of data which is just rotting there. we need to pull it from there and begin to mash up with the water and agri-tech and other things, and we would change this country.
Well, one of the things we do want to do is to get, although there are these other institutions who, do soil tests and all of these other things, wouldn't it be nice if I could just do it on my farm though, and know on a weekly basis or something? So that's where technology/business model comes in again, right? The question, because now I want to actually get to like a nitrate sensor. And it's a newer thing, but I don't want to have just an indicator. So I can do things like electrical conductivity or some other things for the soil, but I want to actually do nitrate on my farm, real time, whatever I feel like. And so we're thinking about how to do things like that as well, so that, and in addition, you want to get to the point where if I'm the farmer, or again, the person who's managing the farm, can I do some of the things myself through technology? So like the tomato that's dying that I told you about, if I take a picture and I can now have somebody process it, and I know today, I take the test today and I know today, oh my gosh, that's what's happening. How do we get closer to real time so that as your questions are coming up, right there, right then, you can have them addressed? And I think before you asked about, it's the same thing with anytime there's just this question about people and their motivations, it's almost like a big experiment, right? Like over time, because understanding, because the thing that motivates, there's even differences, right, geographically. I mean, there's no one Kenyan motivator factor, right? So region by region, you're gonna have to actually be with the people, talk to them, and kind of through that process, think about what's gonna work and what's not. And it's not easy. And so just like the other gentleman, I don't have a magic bullet, but at least recognizing, I think a positive and a progressive step forward is to recognize that there's just no such thing as a small scale farmer. Like, what is that anyway, right? They're all in different regions. They all have different things that are affecting them. And they all came from different just cultural leanings, even in Kenya. So how do you at least recognize that, yeah, a small-scale farmer over here might have an entirely different sets of needs and constraints as compared to one over there? And so that, again, is just an interesting question, and to think about, at least it sets the platform to start maybe considering what's going to work and what's not, which doesn't get you to the point of selling the app, but at least, maybe I shouldn't go there first. Maybe I should kind of do these people because I'd have more success there in that region because the people are like this or this.
Okay, and my last question is, you have talked about sensors in tanks and everything, but actually most people are using running water, where let's say the county is giving water, so what the person does is, he knows the water will be coming on a Tuesday or something, so he will irrigate the area at that time, and now when wait for the next 2 more days, he does it again that way. So I was asking, have you formed a platform, or have you formed a way you can sort out, encourage people to invest more in tanks in which they can manage their own water? Because that is another major problem. Like if you go to in Nairobi, let's say in sites like Kangwara and the rest, people are spending money each and every day buying water, doing this and doing that, instead of looking for a way, as let's say we are the community staying in this plot, how can we store our water in which it comes on those specific days, let's say on Monday or Tuesday, we can store it in that will push us for a week, and through the system, you can know we're using water this much. So we need, let's say, an extra tank in order for us to contain the water for this much.
Yes. So the short answer is yes, but I guess that's all I can say. So we're looking at ways for how we're going to scale this idea, and so we have discussions that are ongoing that will address that.
Okay. My name is Steve Osumba from Technical University of Kenya, mechanical engineering student. So I have 3 questions. The first one, I'm going to speak as a member of Smart Innovators. This is a group of engineering students from my school. Actually, these students came up with a working model of, it's known as smart irrigation system, which incorporates sensors both in the tank, in the farm. So the system generally can monitor the amount of water you require depending on the programming you're going to do. And also it can send the data to you.
Can you hear the back? Okay.
They can?
You can? Okay. Yeah, you stand up. You are a student.
I'm going to start again. My name is Steve Osumba. I'm a mechanical engineering student from Technical University of Kenya. So, Jen, I have 3 questions. The first question, I'm going to speak as a member of Smart Innovators from the same school. The Smart Innovators came up with a model known as the Smart Irrigation System. The system is capable of monitoring water consumption depending on the farm. That means you have to feed the system the type of moisture content the crop need. So all that can be done by the farmer through the phone. So we are asking if the IBM can offer help to test the model generally now in the field, because they've just come up with the theoretical version of it. The second question I'm going to ask...
Wait. What?
they came out, it's English, you know?
No, I just wait. So when you started, I was imagining actual pieces of things, and then you said theoretical.
Yeah.
So is there...
Is it working?
Actually, the problem is funding of the prototype.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what it does.
We'll
Yeah.
talk.
Okay.
And now, the second question I'm going to ask as a concerned citizen of Kenya. Now I'm back from being a student to being a concerned citizen of Kenya. So, actually, Turkana, to me, I consider is the most blessed part in the country, yet they suffer a lot. Why am I saying this? Turkana has the huge amount of underground water, if I'm right.
Okay.
And then apart from that, Turkana receive a good amount of sunshine. So I was wondering, water plus sunshine is equal to life itself.
Kind of.
Yeah, not kind of, it's that way. So I'm wondering if there's a model of coming up with maybe desert farming mechanism, which you can use this underground water plus the sunlight to feed those people, because they're actually very richer than all of us here, but yet they're suffering.
Okay.
Yeah. The third question, still speaking as a concerned citizen.
Yeah.
Actually, I got a very disturbing photo here.
Oh, no. Yeah, I don't know how we put it up.
Oh, okay. Somebody drinking from a stream directly.
Yeah.
Like a muddy stream.
Yeah. That's actually a child. And from the photo, you can see that actually that place is not a desert, or it's a place receiving rainfall. Like you find most NGOs, which always offer or drill balls, whatever they do, they offer balls, but they drill the balls and leave them there for the community to manage them. And they end up, maybe within a year, the equipments are broken up, they're not there to repair them. So you find that there's no, so you find that such situations are there, and you find that in every 1,000 children, 120 of them will die from diseases. So wondering which mechanism can we do to stop this? Actually, water. Without water, I think that's not humanity. Thank you.
Very good questions. So let me start with the last one first. So one of the things, for what you've basically pointed out, it touches on a couple things. So the question is that any and every Kenyan could ask is, why do I even have to worry about getting water? Like, why isn't it there? Like, why hasn't somebody taken care of it, right? Like, I have the county governor. Why haven't they ensured that I have water? Okay, we'll leave that. But that's the fundamental thing, right? I started by talking about the number of municipal systems that there are. And it doesn't cover even half of the population, really. So it means a whole bunch of other people are fending for themselves. And a lot of NGOs have come in to fill that gap. So one of the projects that we will be working on, and I can't give too many details of it, but there's a consortium of NGOs who they got to the point of thinking, you know what we're doing is just not sustainable. Because based on the models by which they were funded, people who are sending in money, they love it when they see, I dug a new borehole, yay, everybody in the community, but then that's it, and then they leave. Nobody is there to ensure, oh my gosh, it's a borehole, so am I gonna have fuel for the pump? On and on and on, all of the other things that maintenance entails. So with this consortium, the question that what we're thinking about, and actually in that region, is can there be a way to, well, fine, the NGOs sort of act as grease for the wheel, right? They can stimulate an investment. But can we find a way to work with the folks that are there to have more independently run water utilities? How can that happen? And so that means you kind of have to understand, well, who's going to need water and who's going to pay for it and how? In some cases, people are ready to pay for something for water, but it's just not even available, that they have the option. So there's a discussion like that that's happening, and I'm hopeful that with this group of NGOs that have come together, it seems as if they're very interested to even plan for their end. Because for any NGO that exists, your goal should be to end, right? Your goal shouldn't be, there are other NGOs who have been in Turkana for 50 years, which is, and I won't call any names, but that's like a striking failure, right? Like, you shouldn't really ever plan to be in business for 50 years as an NGO unless you keep changing your mission every 5 years, and most of them don't. It's the same mission they had from the beginning in general, to protect livelihoods. So this group of NGOs, they're having discussions about planning for their end, meaning there could actually be a time where we don't exist here anymore because there's been enough local traction and people are able to stand up these boreholes or whatever else and run the water systems in a way that keeps them funded and maintained and providing water. So I'm hopeful about an idea like that. For your other question, when you mentioned that water in Turkana and sunshine in Turkana being the ingredients for life, that's kind of tricky, right? Because, the average rainfall in Turkana is about 400 millimeters a year, really low. They have the groundwater that was found, but you can't trust the marketing, right? So there's a lot of splash about the big find. But there are actually serious questions. Like when I talk to some of the hydrogeologists and others who were there and who are actually looking at the water source, they kind of stay away from the marketing because water is there, but how much is it? And then what's the quality? So even if it's there and it's all full of fluoride and it's salty, you're still gonna have to put treatment on it for it to be really useful. And they don't actually know the answer to that yet either. So that's why it's tricky. And then the sunshine is a double kind of thing, right? It's sunshiny, but it's dry. So where does the water come from? So that's the tricky thing, and I think that's been, the ongoing source of the perennial food shortages and everything else. But I think the idea that if there's at least the shift to have just more local entrepreneurs be a part of what happens there, and if they're able to find new avenues to make money, so that then ultimately you have new ways to put water to use in a way that's going to be productive for everyone, I think that would nudge and be the way forward. It would be great if for the big find that was there, if there was some huge water-loving enterprise that was going to set up there. So imagine Pepsi or Coca-Cola in Turkana. That changes everything, right? So one, they're going to be a big generator for the economy, but they're using the water because it's a strategic, if it is the case, that you have free-flowing, lots of water there to be tapped, and it doesn't require a lot of money to be cleaned up before it can be put to use. And if a huge company or Mumias, whatever, any huge company who can make sense of operating there, and if they're able to now have a boom there, it changes the whole dynamic, and everything else theoretically should flow from that. So I think those ideas are being considered, but things take time, I guess. Yes?
Hi, my name is Simon. I'm a software developer stroke farmer. So
from where?
Stroke farmer.
Ah.
Yeah, but my hometown is in Ukambani. It's a pretty dry place. So my question is like this, yeah? If they say 70% of the earth is water and 30% is land, but yet still my people are really suffering with this water issue. So my question is, how feasible is it to come up with let's say a large desalination plant whereby we can recycle seawater and transport it to them? Because nowadays we haven't seen people are reclaiming islands from the sea.
Yeah.
So why not water?
Is your place near a coastal area?
Yeah, to some extent.
So I guess kind of I think one of the earlier questions. So technically, it's possible to do desalination, but it's one of the most expensive ways to get water, right? Because of all of the electricity that's involved and the fuel that you need to make it work. So technically it's feasible, but for where your location and everything else, I mean, I wonder if it's the best option. And so I don't know your location very well and what surface water versus groundwater looks like. So I mean, again, the big problem that we have is Kenya, like many other countries across sub-Saharan Africa, in general, there's a lot of water, but it's just not in the right places at the right time. So there's more of this issue of how do you have and facilitate equitable distribution. And that's why a lot more of this, data gathering and planning is important. But there's water I think there's a lot of water that's even more easily accessible than even having to go to the salt water. So the answer is, yeah, it's technically feasible, but I don't know if it's the most cost-effective way to move forward.
Because rainwater is not an option. I'm saying rainwater it's not a good option.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I have one question. And a number of questions, but it's like guys have already asked. Yeah, when you talked about application, I thought about database. What measures are you guys going to put in place in order to avoid cybercrime?
Cybercrime? So, I mean, you're asking them about the security protocols and all of that. So that's, what can I say? I'm trying to find the best way to say that. It's the thing, that's the normal IBM thing. If you have a system or solution architected by IBM, we do security. I can't tell you in detail about the security protocols because I don't know, but it's not the first thing I think about because in the end, we handle it. Like our IT guy, I think one day, I forget what was going on, but somebody kind of suggested that maybe the lab could be hacked. And he was like, never. He was like, never happen, He's a Kenyan guy. But, so I don't know, I can't tell you, if you're really into security and you want to know more about our protocols, you can follow up with me and I can, but it's not the first thing I think about with a system like this. You even saw for the IoT architecture, like once you're bringing all of those devices in, there's like a layer of security protocols. I couldn't tell you all of what they are, but they're there, like they're embedded in terms of the way that we design. So even for something like Bluemix as a platform that you're developing on, it's embedded, right, as a part, so that as a developer, really what you have to think about is, well, what are you trying to bring to the market? Does that work? But please, feel free to follow up with me if you have more questions on deep down security.
I think cybersecurity is a list of their problems. Yeah. Yes.
I have the microphone. My name is my name is Lidon. I have two comments and one question. Grace talked about issues of homeowners, especially like in areas like Eastlands, and the issue of ways that issues of control could be done. But I think one of the biggest problems, especially with Nairobi Water Company distribution, is that the cost is still low for water. So even if you charge individual households, it's not punitive enough. That's my thought. Number two.
I missed the first part. So you're saying you want Nairobi Water to increase rates so people don't waste water?
There's a gray area with that because of
even in the traffic now, we need the price of fuel to go up.
Well, there are other reasons that they could have. This price issue for water is everywhere around the world. This is the debate that happens, right? Like, are you pricing the resource properly? Because there's so many kumbaya feelings around water. Like it's everybody's right to it, on and on and on. And so there's always this balance of ensuring that even the poorest can have access to it without having a lot of strain on their budget. But then at the same time, if you're gonna manage it professionally, then you need to have enough money coming in so you can maintain the infrastructure. But we have other issues here too, right? There's a lot of waste that happens. Before Nairobi Water, well, I don't want to make any statements, but before Nairobi Water would raise rates, there are other things, there are other leakages and losses they would need to address before, and I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
Okay. My second comment runs around the statement that was made by Tim, and it's on the based on the picture that went around. You know, water as a natural resource is what we would call a public good. And there's a problem with public goods. For instance, maybe the place where the picture was taken, probably no entrepreneur would be interested because the returns are not there. So then we talk about market failures because of government and NGOs and stuff like that. So it's a very tricky issue, you know, to try and balance, like you mentioned. And now to my question.
But let me challenge you on the issue that there is no market where that kid was doing like that. I think you remember the story of Pata. Someone had come here earlier and saw Africans walking barefoot and said there is no market here. So left and went. So Bata came and said there is a huge market here. None of these people has shoes. You see, you should be the second option and say, look at this, there is no water here. And you bring, because you change their lives, you begin to make the money.
It's a challenge to an entrepreneur. My question, from the picture you showed us of the digital aquifer and the slide on how much water reserve, how much water do we have? Well, the statement sounds very empirical. It's as if we can quantify the quantity of water we have around the world. So if we controlled for rainfall, you know, as a replenishment factor, do we have statistical data on, like, are global water reserves the same? Are they diminishing? Or is it just an issue of our own mismanagement? That's why we keep having crises with water usage. Thank you.
So you're wondering, what do we know about water right now?
Yeah.
We have, so in terms of quantifying the groundwater reserves in total that Kenya has, across the 5 or 6 aquifer basins, there's been work done, but so you can do imaging and there are other remote kinds of things that you can do to try to quantify and understand the number in aggregate. But the problem that comes up is that when you start, if you're only looking at the aggregate number, you still can't address the local challenges. Because even if I told you right now, this was a number for Kenya, that's not enough to understand what each individual is facing and how to address that. So we have approaches for estimating, right? And you'll see several different numbers depending on the method somebody used to do their estimate. The question is how to get more accurate around that and how to get to a point where it's not just a top-down regulatory approach. How do I actually understand the people over here versus the people over there? And the reason that's important, again, is that, so if you think of like a typical hydrogeologist kind of, or someone who's looking at managing water reserves, if they go to any particular county, maybe they'll add up, you can do like a water balance, right? So the water balance would say, well, what kind of stream flow do I have on average? And then, based on my best estimates, how thick is the aquifer layer? And I can do some other estimates. So I can come up with some kind of balance that tells me, all right, it seems that there's about this much water in the area. So WAMRA has estimates, for example. And then you even get to the point where if you put on a map where a stream or a river is, and then the farmer is over here, you'll say, oh, okay, I have like 5 farmers, and they're kind of near a water source. When you actually go to the farm, though, you're like, well, what's going on? Like, it's like, so all of these numbers you had about water, it seems like water is there. You go to the farm, and the guy is still suffering. He doesn't have water. So why is that? And so those are the nuances we want to get to. And I think for our perspective, the idea is that for all of these estimates that are there, can we come up with a better one if we know actually at each individual location what's going on, and if we have better ideas of that? And then the bet is that if we understand in a more fine-grained way what's happening at each individual's farm or at their house or at each school, then in addition to now saying how much water there is, we can be more specific about it, right? So in ward XYZ of Nairobi, this is the situation. In XYZ there, this is the situation. So everybody who lives there, if you're going to buy land, you know what's going on there. Or if I'm the governor, I can make different decisions. So there are numbers, but what are the numbers and for which decisions?
But for sure, water is becoming more scarce. And I think that's why Bill Gates recently drank water from the sewer to show the impact of actually recycling the water that we have. Nobody knows whether it's finite or we get more. It depends whether it's up there or it has come down. I don't know.
Right, so, but location by location, it'll vary. So you don't, I mean, before you said, for example, you take away the rain, but you actually need that part, right? Because it's a cycle. And so for different parts of the aquifer in Nairobi, for example, recharge varies, right? Most of the recharge is thought to happen from the Aberdares, and then depending on the kind of aquifer, whether it's in Nairobi or elsewhere, the way water is flowing matters, how people are using water matters as well. So you can have portions of the system where there's drawdown happening, and drawdown means that every time I need to drill a borehole, it's gonna be deeper and deeper and deeper, and more expensive to both drill and maintain. There are other areas where, because of how the groundwater is flowing, like South B area, once you kind of get to the end, it's shallower for the groundwater, so access is easier. And in that location, then different things are going on with the dynamics. So having this understanding of the spatial distribution, I mean, increasingly becomes important. And that's why you can't really make good decisions if all you can say is, well, the Nairobi aquifer has this amount.
The last three questions, 1, 2, 3. Maybe one more, lady, because we violate the constitution.
My name is Caleb Muyodi, equally a student engineer from the Technical University of Kenya. And mine is just a concern, having sat through your presentation. Maybe I'd want you to maybe incorporate in your working greenhouse farming. Because you've mentioned the farmer has come out as a very key aspect of your project today. And Dr. mentioned that as young people coming up, we understand commodity exchange. And he mentioned you can exchange something grown in Ukambani with something maybe cassava and maybe maize or sugarcane grown in probably Western Kenya. But today, for example, if you go to Mumias today, Mumias is known for sugarcane growing and probably other food crops like maize and such issues, but mainly sugarcane growing. If you go to, If you go to Mumias today, you'll discover, due to the expanding business space, Mumia Sugar, for example, is facing a lot of competition from other rivals that have come in. And that is supposed to pose maybe a benefit to the farmer. That is ideally according to business and such things. But you'll discover it is the farmer who is on the losing end due to some, maybe the farmers are losing out, maybe due to these farms which are usually leased to the company, so the company gives you fertilizer and such issues. So when you submit maybe your returns, they cut so much, even you end up having a deficit than what you put in your farm. And you'll discover a time has come for this country for people to do diversification. So people in Mumias will not continue growing sugarcane all the days. They'll have, a time will come when they'll have to diversify to other crops. And I've seen a few farmers have come up with greenhouses in Mumias, basically for horticultural crops, like tomatoes, chilies, things which have not been growing there before. But they've had a very, very great challenge. I can say 70% of those greenhouses have failed. And the biggest question is usually, they're not able to ascertain the quantity of water that they're supposed to put into use. And that is a very fundamental objective that I've had her mention all through her presentation. So maybe I would just like her to, maybe as she does more research, and Ukambani I think is blessed because everybody who comes to do any research on water will always have something to do in Ukambani, and they never go to the other side of the country. So I'd encourage them to visit other places because Ukambani and maybe other regions around Nairobi, they receive less than average rainfall. So I think they should equally visit places which receive more than average rainfall and teach them on greenhouse farming and more fundamentally on water harvesting, which is very, very important.
Well, just one thing though. So you said to teach. So, I mean, for what we are doing here, we're interested to find good examples of what people want to do. I don't want to, I mean, we talked a lot about social issues and what matters or what. I don't want to, the way you said it, it was as if we're kind of evangelizing things, you know, like evangelizing technology, and we're going to make sure over here they do the right thing with water. That's not our role, really. So just so there's no confusion, the goal of this discussion is really to say, we're IBM, here's what research is, and here are kinds of the issues that we're looking at. In the end, and so saying that means that now, as you're thinking about the things that matter to you and the questions that you think are important, if you see some way or you hear something where you're like, whoa, did they think about that? Or maybe they should consider this, then we have a dialogue and we talk. But there's no part of this where I'm now, the next step is going to be, you know, I'm going to Eastern, I'm going to Rift Valley, and I'm evangelizing, this is how it should look like. I'm not the government.
Sure.
So the government, I mean, maybe I can work with the government if they ask for advice. Yes.
Sure.
So
if I may,
just to be clear.
Yeah, if I may interject, probably I don't really mean where we shall come up with a forum like a church forum where everybody, no, not really that. What I actually mean is, as Professor talked about the quail effect, as you come up with your project, you could partner with maybe one farmer and try.
I would answer that question.
Okay.
This is a commercial enterprise. Actually, there's so much research in Western Kenya, which is aiming at helping the sugarcane growers. I will give you like 20 research saying that you have the best climate for soybeans. Now, IBM would give you a product on the most ideal way of growing soybeans, but they can't come to begin to evangelize that this is your soil and this is what we want you to do.
And it doesn't mean that somebody, so if there are already organizations who are in that area, and they're saying, you know, I wish we knew how to collect data better. I wish we knew how to, we can work with them because it'd be an interesting use case. But, you know, but good. So actually, I just don't want...
Actually, the problem is him. Let me explain it. And this is very important because a lot of people are saying farmers at home, and you come from there. And they are not being taught, and you have gone to school. You are the one who is supposed to go back and put them together and say, hey, there was a lady from the Caribbean working with the IBM, and they told us this, and this is what we must begin to do. Now you want me to go to Western Kenya, or you want, the problem is you. It begins with you.
I agree.
Yes.
I agree.
So if you change tomorrow and go and say things you have heard here, that this sugarcane is useless. There is another research that we can do this. And you come back to her and say, you said there's some equipment which can give me optimal use of water. Then she would go and get the product and give it to you. So
actually, that is really the process.
Let's take responsibility ourselves. Those who are seated here, and you alone, you can create a revolution in Western Kenya. Because you go there and do it with one farmer, you get the quail effect, and you become so important, you get elected. Yeah.
Asante.
Yeah. So that is the point. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay, my name is Samuel Njogu from Technical University, though civil engineering
You guys are in the house today. Very nice.
Civil engineering.
I thought it was Elizabeth that brought you all out.
Yeah. Okay, I have two questions. My first question is, have you studied the role of women in decision making through water management? In terms of, okay, I've ever gone to Korogosho, and there I saw children playing near sewage water in the open channels. And from what you have presented, I've seen that...
What did you do as a man?
Okay. There's so much you can do, but
Now it's getting interesting. What did you do? Actually.
I will admit I did nothing, but from what you've presented, I've seen that 50% of hospital visits are due to water-related diseases, and probably those children are affected by diseases like diarrhea and such things. I've also seen that 27 billion shillings is used in treatment. Yeah. Now, how can we deal with this issue in terms of this 27 billion while using women in decision making, to take this 27 million to be used in water management and providing night storage systems rather than being used in treatment? And my second question is in terms of planning and forecasting for water resources and allocation. Have you done a study on how households, industrial users, and agricultural, farmers can be brought together to discuss and also base their decision on financing and also allocation of water resources?
So for the last one, you know, the fine-grained monitoring that we're doing at each location will get us closer to understanding essentially that, right? So on average, if I'm a homeowner in Karen, what does my water use look like as compared to somebody in Langata, as compared to somebody else? And then for other user types, we'd be able to answer those questions more deeply, and not just how much in the aggregate, but with what kinds of patterns, right? Like over as a year progresses or as a day progresses, what does that look like? So we will have that kind of information, and that should facilitate better planning and management for whoever would want it. I mean, again, like for who we cater to, I'm happy if at some point, if a governor or just whoever else decides they want that kind of information, we would work with them to make it available. But there are also other entities that for other reasons just need to know. You know, so if I'm a factory or whatever else and I'm in an industrial area or something, I can get better information to help, you know, optimize my processes. Maybe I'm pumping too often, like I showed with the optimization on the energy. So there are questions that individuals actually have that we can help to address. On your first question, I'm going to go back to you with a question. So why did you focus on women specifically? What is that about?
Okay, based on, from what I know, even in these photos we normally see in the television, that there is a water shortage in any part of the country. You normally see probably in Northern Frontier, women carrying jerry cans. In town here, in Korogosho, a jerry can is like, a jerry can of water is like 30 shillings. Normally the people who I normally see buying are women. Rarely men. Men who buy, most of them use it for car wash and such things. But
Yes.
but you see women are also involved in cooking, washing their children and such things.
So
they are children.
Our children.
Yeah, okay.
So your question is, given that they tend to be at this interface, right? You're wondering how does the information assist them? Or is there a problem though? Yeah. So the fact that they are the one.
Actually, let me. Yes, a very good question. In the sense that government is using so much money on curative measures, using almost 27 billion, and still you find simple problems with water. If you find some counties in Western Kenya account up to 90% of child mortality rates coming out of poor dirty water.
Yeah. So the question is, can women...
Why can't we do something so that this money, 27 billion, can be used for other things, like water management? We can manage it better, we can provide clean water.
Build infrastructure.
But actually we don't need 27 billion to correct that. If one MP spends 5 million to get piped water to every household every year, they get the money, they would change that, they would reverse it. And the 27 billion from curative cannot just be used for other infrastructure, but you can even buy houses for everybody. because 27 billion every year, you can buy houses for everybody. If we begin to think like this, then we would make a huge impact. And it's a good concern, by the way.
But I think, though, I thought there was something else in your question with the focus on, because are you thinking that there should be, I guess, more strategies to engage women?
Yeah, in my focus on women, I'm just asking, have you tried to engage them more rather than other groups, since they seem to be more affected?
This is a business woman.
Yeah.
The government needs to engage with women more.
Yes, the answer to that, no, we haven't specifically in any of the projects that we're doing right now. It hasn't come up specifically on that.
There was a last one. I had promised her that she would talk for 1 hour. This is 2.5 hours. But
hi, my name is James.
Hi.
With the fact water is a very valuable resource, and with the fact that it's getting scarcer every decade, and now you find people looking for alternatives, such as you find there are certain regions in the world where people are harvesting water from thin air. Now my question is, how is IBM putting any researching on such alternatives, and how much would it take to establish such projects, and what would it take to get NGOs and the government on board?
Yeah. So you ask an interesting question. So IBM research in Kenya isn't specifically looking at, like, we're not, like, for our lab that we have, it's a data lab, so we don't actually, we're not evolving new technologies like that. So the interesting story is one of the research scientists at the lab, he has one of those things, right? It pulls the moisture from the air in. And I think he moved here, so I think 2 months after he moved there, he's like, I'm shutting that thing off. Why? Electricity, right? Too much. So that's the question. I mean, we have other, the lab in Kenya is the 12th IBM research lab. So we have labs in California, in New York, in Haifa, Israel, in Dublin. So the lab in Almaden in California, they do some, on polymers, if you're looking at osmosis, just things to really finely, do water quality things. So we have other labs who do that. The question here, though, is what's going to be the best angle to start looking at and tackling what's going on with water here? And so this is part of where this commercial angle comes in with our decision making. So even if I could do, I don't know, a lower energy cost water treatment thing, maybe I do research and I invest another year or two to now sell this thing. Is that gonna do it? Like, am I gonna get enough from that really speaks more broadly to the issues of farmers, to the issues of, ensuring? So we pick our battles, essentially, is my answer. And so we're not, because for the way that we've placed our bet about where we can get the most bang for the buck for the area that we're investigating, it's more along the lines of understanding these interconnections about how people are using water, and then, kind of pursuing along that line. It doesn't mean in the future, I mean, we're having talks, for example, with other entities. So on the nitrate soil sensing, or even on water quality, we're working with other partners who do deep research into that to look at how we would connect up those instruments to better deliver information about water. So there are others who are doing that we probably would partner with them if there's an angle to increase the water information that people have.
Okay, my question was, do you have water sensing technologies that when I put my glass, I would know right away that it's good water to drink?
That's a really important question on the quality.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. Like, that's our next step. I mean, it's really hard, right? But the key thing you want to know is you can taste if water is salty, but you can't taste if it has bacteria that are going to make you sick. So we're working with others to come up with that. And and that's what I've said. I mean, I'm pretty sure because of the interest that I've seen that people have, at the right price point, people would be willing that you just get your own little filter, you do a test, you're like, oh, and leave that one. And so we're working on that part, but via partners.
We will share the intellectual property. We just have given you the idea. Now, haven't we learned something huge? So let's give a good clap. And I did not ask her. She promised that she will come again. She would go, but she would come again.
Absolutely.
Especially, we would find a sponsor for an app challenge in the water sector. We haven't found one. We have one in the next session that we have. We had one in the last one we had, the energy sector, but we're going to look for one in water. Then we can also invite her again to speak. We want to thank you. Even myself, who doesn't learn well, I learned something.
Very
well.
good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you can have a Now, our next session would be on 21st of March. 21st of March. And we are going to have a speaker from either University of Tel Aviv in Israel or somebody from Israel to just come and introduce the Agri-Tech Challenge. And I had one is there. Briefly, this is an area that is now ready for exploitation. A lot of our people in Africa have been buying cows which are stupid. You know, they give them 1 liter of milk, and they eat grass more than a cow that gives 40 liters of milk. Does that really make sense? So we want to change this such that our farmers, actually, how many of you know the breed that your parents have? The breed, what? Maridadi. There is nothing like that in there. Nothing like that exists. If we must change Africa, we must begin to touch areas that would change us, meaning that would change the lives of the poor and improve their livelihood. Meaning, if we are able to change the small livestock farmer by improving productivity by 1,000 times, from 1 liter to several liters. The same thing you had Dr. Flemming talking about how we can leverage on water optimization to get the greatest productivity. If you know that in Nigeria, the amount of tomatoes that goes to waste is more than the amount of tomatoes they import to the country. And Nigeria consumes most of the tomatoes in Africa, meaning they are not optimizing what we are doing here. Even in Kenya, we import a lot of dried tomatoes when we have sunshine, and we import that from Spain, which counts the number of days they have sunshine in a year. So we need to look at ways of doubling or quadrupling the returns from the agricultural sector by use of various applications. Already there are some in the market, but we can do more, especially in the area of linking GPS, the soil types, such that you can constantly be giving the farmer information that would lead to greater productivity. That's how we can become innovative. And this is one area where we don't just want to have the apps, we want to go beyond the apps and begin to implement. In fact, I have 3-4 areas in Kajiado where, as you are doing this, we are going to begin to do the implementation. I chose Kajiado because I can dash there and see and come back. So don't ask why I didn't choose Kakamega, you know. But we can change the lives of people in Kakamega because the land size has become smaller. It doesn't grow. So the only thing you can grow is the amount of food that you can raise from that small place. And that's what we are thinking to do and begin to change our part of the world. So on 21st, it will be on the agricultural sector, especially the apps that would improve on productivity. But please, come on time, because I promise these people you come at 10, and we finish at 12:30, but today we are finished at 12:30. which is good. Always we go beyond one because most of you come late. So I thank you so much for coming. I don't know whether you had any Karibu, there's a young man here. He has a 2-hour speech, so you can.
Just be comfortable. You can get some water. This might take a while. Anyway, I'm just messing. I don't have a speech. Oh, okay. It's okay. Yes. So next Saturday. Who knows what's happening next Saturday? Next Saturday. What's happening next Saturday? Yes. iHub is turning 5, and we're having a really huge bash next Saturday at the Arboretum. Let's see a woo woo! Yeah. So the last, I think, bunch of free tickets are coming out on Monday at 9:30. So if you haven't grabbed a ticket, please make sure Monday, 9:30, log on, get a ticket. Don't miss out. So, those of you who already got your tickets, James has been handing out the actual tickets from, I think, Thursday. So if you have the ticket you sent on email, download it and come with it here. James Orengo will give you the physical ticket for the day. The reason you need that ticket is because it has a food voucher and drink vouchers on it. Yeah. So you must have that ticket to get into the event.
I just want to translate what he said because I kept on seeing people like, what? iHub would be 5 years old on Saturday. And we are having a big celebration at the Arboretum. Please get a free ticket and show up there and begin to see people who have made a difference over a long period of time, and to support an area that is supporting a lot of new innovations for this country. So these people talk Sheng plus other things. So me, I don't have we, but that's all. But thank you.
Sorry, I need to mention that we'll also be having a job fair and a showcase going on the same day from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. So for those of you who are looking for jobs with these many tech companies we have in our country, please come through. We'll also have a training, a 5-minute training on the day. So do not miss that. I think that's more or less it. Yeah? Oh yes, each ticket comes with a free Uber ride. So you don't need to worry about how to get back home from Arboretum. Yeah? Cheers. Let's meet on Saturday and have a blast.